So in this video, we're going to cover homing the machine for the first time, and then after that, setting the soft limits of the machine. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about what homing is, why it's important, what are some of the uses on MR-1. So what homing is it's setting the machine coordinate origin for the machine. So the x-axis carriage is going to touch its limit switch, and the gantry is going to touch its two limit switches. And that point of contact where the limit switch is triggered is the machine coordinate origin for the machine. So what's that? Why is that important? If I'm running a program, or if I'm running a production job where I'm running a lot of different parts through it, and I lose my origin for whatever reason, let's say I crash the machine, or the machine gets powered off and powered back on again, I need to go and tell the machine where it is. Where is the position of the spindle relative to my job? So by doing that, I can do a homing routine. It'll go and find those switches, and then at that point, it'll know where is my fixture or my job and my work relative to the machine coordinates. That way I don't have to, if I have an issue like a crash or I have a power off situation, I don't have to go and touch off of my part or my fixture to get back into cutting. And then, so that's homing. And then what we also have is what's called setting our soft limits. So each of the axes, it has a homing switch only on one end of its total travel. In the case of x-axis, for example, as you know, the limit switch is on the left-hand side, but there is no limit switch on the right-hand side. The way we handle that is with soft limits. So we're actually going to tell the machine, hey, after you do a homing cycle, how far in the positive x direction, for example, can I travel before I hit a hard limit? And so we want to set the soft limit just before that so that the controller will lock out any motion beyond that soft limit travel distance. So we'll go ahead and do that for each of the axes. For now, we can go ahead and jump into the homing routine. Before we do that, just want to double check a few things. We want to make sure that number one, we've got the Y1 and Y2 motors plugged into the correct ports on the electronics box. And number two, we want to make sure that we got the limit switches each at the proper locations. In other words, we don't want to have the Y1 limit switch in the Y2 position or vice versa. So the first thing I'll check is I'm just going to go and manually trigger each limit switch, and then we can look on the cut control interface, and at the bottom here, there's actually grayed out or ghosted icons for each of the limit switch positions. So I'm going to just go ahead and touch each one individually. I'll start with the X. And there'll be a warning that says a limit switch has been activated, but if I touch that, I can come and clear this. Say proceed without homing for now. And you can see that it's triggering the X there. So I'm pushing that with my finger here. Now I'm going to do the Y1 switch. You can see it's highlighting Y1. I'll see if I can reach in here to do the Z. It's kind of tricky to reach. There's Z. And then I'll walk around and do the Y2 switch. And as you can see, it's highlighting that Y2 icon. So I know now that I've got all of my limit switches appropriately wired. For the Y1 and Y2 motor wiring, you're going to have to just double check and trace your wire from your stepper motor back through the loom down to the box. Make sure that you've got this motor, this motor is Y2, the other side is Y1. If you've got any issues with homing, if the machine won't home, if it makes kind of misstep noises during the homing process, very, very likely that you either have a limit switch wired incorrectly or one of your Y1 or Y2 motors wired incorrectly. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and home the machine. Here's how you do it. The home button here, I'm going to just go ahead and click that. And then it'll pop up with a message. I'm just going to hit the home machine button, and then the machine will start moving into its home position. So it starts with Z first, and then it does X and Y simultaneously. And now I'm at my home position. It's also worth mentioning there's another use on MR1 for having limit switches for the Y1 and Y2 axes. Recall that we went to great lengths to set the limit switch stops after sweeping a block of known squareness with an indicator. The beautiful thing about MR1 is it's got an auto squaring functionality, so if you ever have a crash or you question whether your x-axis is still perpendicular to your y-axis, all you have to do is home your machine and it'll square it back up again. With the machine now in its home position, I can move on to setting the soft limits. To do that, I got to demonstrate a few things on the screen here. So the first is, you may not know this, but if you come into view, for those that have the touchscreen, you click on this on-screen keyboard, you can select whether it's the on-screen keyboard is off, touch only, or always on. If you have the touchscreen, you should have it set to touch only. And what that does is when I click into areas here, it brings up a on-screen keyboard that I can go and type in values. So again, if you have the touchscreen, you're going to want to have touch only selected. So the area we're going to focus on is this distance to box, and I'll explain what this is. So recall that we've just homed the machine. So the machine is currently at its home position. And you can see that limit switch is, the limit switch is 0, 0, 0 for X, Y, and Z. What these numbers represent is the amount of distance to go until each axis hits the limit switch. On the other side, you have travel limit. That's how much distance there is left to go before I hit my travel limit on the other side. These values are default values in cut control, but for every single machine, you have to essentially go and determine what each of these values needs to be for your specific machine. Now, every machine is virtually identical, but, there could be manufacturing tolerances that play into, one machine having 10 thousandths more of travel than another. So it's important to manually check on your machine how much distance you can travel in each direction. So with that being said, I'm going to first click this machine settings button up here. And you can see that in the top left corner, we've got this limit switch table. This is where we're going to be setting our soft limits and the travel distances for each axis. Default, it's enabled. But for this, in order to set this, we're going to go ahead and disable this for now. So you hit disable and then come down here and hit save. Next, I'm going to jog using my jog pendant. I'm going to jog both X and Y until to the other extreme ends of travel, and until I've got about 30 thousandths or so more travel to go before I actually hit a hard stop. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the X, and I'm just going to jog it to the extreme limit of travel over here. So I'm going to get it within about, I would say, a half inch or so. And then a nifty trick that you have in cut control is if you hit the tab button one time, it will jog in 1/1000 increments. So you can see that it's moving 1/1000th at a time every time I click the button. If I hit tab again, it'll jog in 10,000ths of increments. So I'm going to go ahead and use that to get within about 30 thousandths or so of the hard limit. So the right hand upper bearing block will interfere at some point with the X-axis ball screw bearing mount. And I'm going to just take a look here into that gap, and I'm going to stop when I see about maybe 30 to 50 thousandths of gap there. So I'm going to go ahead and call that good there, and I'm going to come over here and look at my DRO. And as you can see, and I've got machine coordinates selected, and it says that in the X direction, I've moved 22.678 inches. I'm going to go ahead and use the same methodology and move in the the negative Y direction up until my hard stops. Now I'm moving in 10,000 increments, and I'm looking to see when interference is on both sides is within about 30 thousandths. I'd say that's good. All right, so now that I've got the y-axis jogged to within about 30 thousandths of the hard limits, I'm going to come in back into machine settings. And I'm going to enter the X and Y values. So a couple of things that are important to note here. The first is that this screen only accepts 2 decimal points. So you're going to want to round up on your number. So in the case of the X, my number is 22.678. I'm going to write in here 22.68 for that. For the Y-axis, my number is 21.68. So I'm going to come in here, write 21 point. Actually, I'm going to write 21.68. Another thing is that even though my coordinate is negative on Y, you're writing in just the travel distance. So in the Y direction, I can travel 21.68 inches. That's the number that you want to write. You don't want to write in negative 21.68 here. I'm going to go ahead and leave this, the soft limits disabled. That's really important for now. So I'm going to go ahead and click save here. And then I'm going to jog the machine or the spindle kind of back more into the center. Oops. Then I'm going to come back into machine settings, and I'm going to, in this location, I'm going to enable my soft limits. So now my soft limits are enabled. Go ahead and click saved. Now I'm going to demonstrate what happens if you accidentally jog or attempt to jog past the hard limits. So I'm going to jog in the X direction. And you can see that the controller prevented me from jogging past that location. So I'm all the way up into the, I'm actually currently 20 thousandths from the soft limit that I've set. Now I'm going to show you that I can do the same in the Y direction. And again, I'm about 16 thousandths from the soft limit that I set there. So now I'm going to go ahead and do the procedure for determining the travel distance for the Z-axis so that we can set the soft limit there. It's a little bit of a different process that we're going to cover. All right, so the first step is to go back into machine settings, and I need to, again, disable the soft limits. So I'm going to click disabled and then hit save. Now, the process that we're going to be used to determine the limit distance for the Z-axis is different than what we used for X and Y. And the process is we're going to jog all the way down to the hard limit that's built in to the Z-axis. We're going to set our Z0 coordinate when we're bumped up against that hard limit. Then we're going to jog all the way up into the limit switch and look at what that coordinate is, subtract about 50 thousandths from that, and then enter that number into the safe limit distance in the menu. So with that being said, I'm going to go into, I'm going to pick up my jog pendant, set my jog speed to 25 inches a minute, and then I'm going to use page down, and I'm going to jog into the lower hard limit here. So you can hear the tone change in the Z-axis stepper motor. That tone change means that I'm missing steps, and the reason I'm missing steps is because I've hit my hard limit. So now I'm going to come back to the controller, and you'll notice at the top, I've got 2 DRO selections available to me. One is machine, so this is showing the machine coordinates, and then the other is work. You'll notice that when I select the work coordinates, I'm able to zero these coordinates. I have a 0 button for each. I'm going to go ahead and select the 0 button for Z. So now I'm at my lower hard limit, and I'm saying that I'm at 0 for Z. Now I'm going to go ahead and jog 6 inches up. And to do that, I'm going to use, I'm going to enter the amount of distance that I want to travel. I'm going to say 6. Enter. Now I'm going to go ahead and just click the Z up button. Actually, I'm going to set it to rapid speed first. And then I'm going to click the Z up button, and that's going to move the Z axis up 6 inches. Okay. Next, I'm going to select continuous jog here. and then I'm going to select 10 inches a minute. And I'm going to jog in the upward direction until the limit switch is triggered on the Z-axis. I'm going to do that now. Okay, I've triggered the limit switch. So you'll notice a few things here. One is that I've got an alarm. It's saying machine alarm, hard limit triggered. That's because I've hit that upper limit switch. And then the second is that my Z coordinate is 6.175. So I need to remember this number. I need to remember 6.125, really rounding to 2 decimal places. 6.13 is the number that I want to set as the soft limit. So 6.13 is my number. If you feel like you may forget that number, I would recommend going ahead and writing that down on a Post-it note now for later use. So I'm going to go ahead and clear this. And you'll notice that that number may have jumped. This number here, after it jumps, you want to ignore that number. It's when the alarm was on the screen, the number that was in the Z coordinate, that's the number that you want to use for your limit switch, or for your limit distance. So I'm going to go ahead here and say proceed without homing. I'm going to jog in the downward direction. I'm going to set my rapid jog speed to rapid. I'm going to jog down. Now you'll get this occasionally. You'll get this alarm again. That's because the limit switch is still triggered. So I'm going to hit clear, proceed without homing. Okay, now I'm off of that limit switch. Now I'm going to go back into my machine settings menu, and then for the Z axis, I'm going to enter 6.13. I'm going to hit OK. And now I'm going to hit enabled on my, for my soft limits. Now I'm enabled, hit save. Okay, now I've entered the correct soft limits for my X, Y, and Z axes. The only thing that's left to do now is to home the machine again. Once I home the machine, I'm going to be able to take full advantage of the limit switches, the soft limits, and other features that require the limit switches. So I'm going to go ahead and hit home. I'm going to home the machine. So one of the features that is really useful when you've got your limit switches set up and your soft limits is that there's a feature called send to front. And what that is it will automatically move the Z-axis up, and it'll bring the gantry forward, and it'll center the spindle basically in its X-axis travel. That's really important because for when you're doing tool changes, it's more convenient to be able to change tools where the spindle is basically close to the doors if you have an enclosure, close to the front of the machine. Versus if it was in the far back, it's a little bit harder to change the tool. So it's just a convenient feature. So the way that you do that is you hit send to front here, this yellow button, and you're going to get basically a warning that pops up that says, hey, are you sure you want to do this? We're going to go ahead and hit continue. And that's where we can make convenient tool changes. If you want to change or customize the point that this moves to, when you hit send to front, you can come back into the machine settings, and you can go to the send to front module, and you can enter any values that you want here. So if you want to have it move to the left or to the right, depending on if you got a vise in the middle of the table, you can customize that any way that you want. So that covers setting up the limit switches, establishing the soft limits, and how to use the send to front feature. Thanks.